Hello and welcome to the 2015 Bulletproof Biohacking Conference. I'm here with Phil Dixon and Dan Radecki. Phil is the CEO of the Academy of Brain-Based Leadership, and Dan is the Chief Scientific Officer. You guys just gave an amazing speech on some of the work that you do. Would you be able to summarize a little bit about what the Academy of Brain-Based Leadership does?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we're planning on taking the latest in neuroscience research and apply it in the field of leadership. That's the real bullet point of what we're trying to do. So we look at taking some of the fundamental concepts of what we're learning about the brain and translating them into what goes on in work behavior, what goes on in the workplace, and fundamentally, what can we do differently that now actually works and improves the workplace.
That's amazing. I noticed one of the things that caught my attention was you spoke a lot about the regulation between two specific parts of the brain, the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. And it's kind of the reptilian survival functionalities and then the higher evolutionary faculties for cognition and executive function. Could you tell me a little bit about how that affects behavior and motivation?
Oh yeah, sure. With motivation in particular, that lower brain, I mean, we've all experienced it where we lose sort of the access to that higher brain, and using the computer analogy, it goes offline. So then if you think about the fact that the way that our brain has evolved and we've evolved, we still have a lot in common with our ancestors, the reptiles. So that brain is strong. It's been quite a while it's been around. So that lower brain, that amygdala, always wants to take over. So that higher brain is sort of, we call it top-down control. It's always sort of buffering it. But that lower brain is really strong and it's just waiting to emerge. So where we talk about it in leadership and in the workplace, as Phil mentioned on his talk, if you threaten people from a social standpoint, if you're a boss and you start micromanaging someone, and to them autonomy is a big deal, well, you're threatening them, and therefore they're going to be in a threat state. And then that amygdala will rise up and they won't be able to have control their emotions. And that's what we see in the workplace setting.
Yeah, wow. So for instance, if you have someone that has maybe a disorder like post-traumatic stress disorder, and they lose their ability to work and interact with their life in the way that normal people do with work and everything, it's kind of like that part of the lower brain is almost on fire and all the activity kind of takes over. Yeah,
post-traumatic stress is an interesting one. Actually, one of the slides I took out was a post-traumatic stress case. And what we see is whereby stress really makes that amygdala stronger and more active. That's over a period of time. We talk about chronic stress, if you're exposed to it every day. Post-traumatic stress, if you can take a patient who's been sexually abused or physically abused for a short period of time, and their brain looks like someone who went through war or someone who had stress for 20 years. It's amazing how quickly this happens. So the post-traumatic stress cases are interesting because there's some thought that mindfulness may be able to help that, because if it really is making the amygdala shrink a little bit, then maybe that can happen, because these post-traumatic stress patients, they really have an overactive amygdala.
Wow. And is that using functional MRI or SPECT scans?
Both. Okay. Yeah.
So it's like a metabolic type?
It's bold, so they'll do bold imaging, looking at the oxygen levels, and also looking at, there's some new work now with imaging, looking at the connectivity between, that's sort of the future. Because if you just look at one area of the brain and say, hey, that's active when you do X, right? And then you correlate it. But what if that area is an inhibitory area? So as it lights up more, it inhibits more. So it gets really complex. But the wave of the future now is networks, connecting networks. So there's algorithms that could connect the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala and the hippocampus, and you could look at the strength of that network over time.
Because they're all communicating.
Yes, they're all communicating. Yeah. So that's sort of the wave of the future.
Totally. Do you guys use imaging and those type of things in your practice, or is it?
No, not in our practice. We're more on the practical side of it. What we do is collaborate with the labs that do. Okay. So like the big social cognitive labs, UCLA, Cambridge, Harvard, Oregon, those places.
Great. So what's an example of some of the training that you guys offer?
Well, we offer a couple of levels of training. One of which is, for example, you've heard of all the leadership characteristics like team building and team development and collaboration and communication, listening skills and all those type of things. We've taken that whole 60 or so different pieces of the curriculum and jig them, if you like, to actually be brain friendly. So that what we do is we teach people about the brains, and then we can turn around and say, and now this is how it actually applies in the workplace. So let me give you an example, if that's useful.
Absolutely.
So you've probably heard of brainstorming. Most people have. It doesn't work very well. And because one of the reasons why brainstorming doesn't work very well is it's not very brain friendly. And we can give you a list of 10 reasons why it's not very brain friendly. But some of which are the very act of coming up with a new idea. So if I come up with an idea and say to Dan, I think we should change the company location to Australia. It may be the best thing in the world, but instantly I've put Dan into a threat state, even though it may be a great idea, right?
Because it's a big change.
Because it's a big change. Yeah. Even if it actually turns out to be a small change, it actually turns out the very act of saying change actually is a threat state to the brain.
And I happen to be big on autonomy, so my sense of, well, Phil's making this decision, so that's going to even enhance the threat response more.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden, change, certainty, consistency, and this, that, and the other is out the window, just because I came up with a new idea. And I might actually turn around and say, actually, no, it's not a very good idea. But I've put everybody's brain into a threat state.
Yeah.
Now, supposing I've come up with a great idea, and Dan is smarter than I am, right? We all know that, by the way, that Dan is smarter than I am. But let's assume for the moment he is, and that what goes on in his brain, if his brain is high in the need for self-esteem, right? I've put his brain into a threat state. So at some basic biological level, he's now reacting, and he has one of 2, 3 choices. He can fight, he can flee, or he can freeze.
Yeah.
Right? So let's assume he decides on this occasion to fight. What are his opportunities? Well, his opportunities are either to come up with a better idea than I did, which he might not be able to on the spur of the moment. His second approach is to knock my idea down. Right? So now he's smart enough to kill all my ideas. Well, that'll never work because this, and this. So when we see that play out in real life corporations of killing ideas, it's actually at a biological level that's going on. Yeah. So now we can pull people back out. We can give them different structures for how they might want to come up with those ideas and how they might want to handle them as a group.
Yeah. So that's kind of where where this really is relevant to biohacking. You guys, I noticed that you kind of broke it down into almost like a hierarchy of needs, starting with safety to get that survival response out of the picture. Because if that's happening, higher productivity and anything else is kind of out of the question.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. All you have to do is, it's really interesting. We talk about that higher brain, how much it dictates. Look at kids, because they don't have a fully functioning prefrontal cortex, literally, especially teenagers, which is why they make such poor decisions. And you look at what kids do, and that actually plays out in the real world, especially in the corporate world. Phil's example, you look at kids and one of them has a ball and the others want to play with it, and he doesn't want to because there's fairness involved, so he takes his ball and leaves. That happens in the corporate world, where you have a good idea, no one wants to listen to it. Okay, well, I'm gonna dogmatically stick to that idea just because no one else liked it. And I like to use that analogy because it really is a metaphor for when you have that higher brain go offline, you look like a kid and you act like a kid. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you guys are based out of, was it Los Angeles or?
We're actually based out of Sacramento.
You're based out of Sacramento. Okay, great. And your website is?
www.academy-bbl.com.
So check these guys out. They do amazing work. They're going to be speaking at the conference all weekend, and I believe you can watch some of the talks you'll be giving on the Bulletproof website.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think so, and there's actually some videos on our website as well.
Yeah. Great.
Go into a little more detail.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.